I don't know what woke me up. Maybe it was the wind rattling the window, or the faint creak of the floorboards that always seemed too eager to betray the quiet. All I knew was that I was no longer alone. The room was cloaked in the thick, suffocating darkness that only 3 a.m. seems capable of producing. I rolled over, groggily searching for the familiar glow of my phone screen, when I saw it. A figure stood in the corner of my room. At first I thought it might be a trick of the light. Shadows often played cruel games in the dimness. But this wasn't just a shadow. It was darker, denser, as though the night itself had decided to gather and stand still. It didn't move, didn't sway. Just stood there. Watching me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I strained my ears against the silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater, and yet I could feel something more, an unnatural weight pressing down on the room. "Hello?" My voice came out shaky, more a whisper than a question. The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. The dread pooling in my stomach answered for it. I reached for my bedside lamp, fingers fumbling against the switch. A soft click, and the bulb sputtered weakly before dying altogether. The darkness closed in, wrapping itself around me like a noose. I thought about calling out again, but something deep and primal stopped me. The figure shifted, the faintest movement, like a ripple on the surface of still water. My blood ran cold. And then it spoke. Not with words, not really. The sound was a low hum, vibrating in my chest more than in my ears. It was as though it was speaking directly into my head, in a language I couldn't understand but instinctively feared. Each syllable seemed to scrape against my thoughts, leaving a trail of unease in its wake. I bolted upright, my legs tangled in the sheets, and fumbled for my phone. Its harsh glow was a lifeline in the suffocating dark. But when I turned it toward the corner, the figure was gone. I exhaled sharply, relief washing over me in waves, but it was short-lived. The room felt wrong. The air was heavier, the shadows somehow deeper. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it, movement in the reflection of my dresser mirror. The figure wasn't in the corner anymore. It was standing right behind me. My heart stopped. I couldn't turn around, not yet. I didn't want to see what might be there. But in the reflection, it was unmistakable. The dark figure loomed just behind me, tall and undefined, like the outline of a person carved out of the void. Its head tilted, slow and deliberate, as though studying me. The buzzing sound returned, louder now, reverberating in my skull. It wasn't speech, not exactly, but it felt like it was trying to say something, forcing its thoughts into mine. "Turn around." I squeezed my eyes shut. No. I wouldn't do it. My body felt paralyzed, every muscle locked in place by fear. I clutched my phone like a talisman, its feeble light trembling in my hand. The air around me grew colder, so much colder, and I could feel its presence closing in. Then the buzzing stopped, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. A moment passed, 2, 3, and I dared to open my eyes. The figure was gone. I let out a shaky breath, my pulse hammering in my ears. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head to glance behind me. There was nothing there. Just my bed, the cluttered nightstand, and the slightly ajar door leading to the hallway. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it had all been a dream, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But then I noticed something that made my stomach churn. The reflection in the mirror didn't match the room. The shadowy figure still stood in the glass, unmoving. But now, it wasn't alone. There was something else behind it. No, someone. My own reflection. Only it wasn't me. Not exactly. The version of me in the mirror was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that stared back at me, pleading. Its mouth opened, soundlessly at first, before it spoke in a voice that didn't feel like mine. "Help me!" My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the dresser to steady myself. The reflection, my reflection, leaned closer, its face filling the glass. The plea in its eyes deepened, desperate, like it was clinging to the last shred of hope. "Help me!" it repeated, louder this time, the voice trembling with fear. I don't understand," I whispered, my own voice shaking. My throat felt dry, like the words were being scraped out of me. The reflection glanced to the side, its hollow gaze fixated on the shadowy figure still looming behind it in the mirror. The shadow had grown darker, more defined, and though its features were still obscured, I could feel it smiling. Not with its mouth, there was no mouth to be seen, but with its presence. A sense of triumph radiated from it, cold and sharp. The buzzing returned, more insistent now, like static crackling through my brain. Images flashed in my mind, a dark room, a spiraling staircase, and a door slamming shut. I couldn't tell if they were memories or something else, visions, maybe, warnings. The reflection me spoke again, and this time, the words felt heavier, laced with urgency. Don't let it in. My stomach dropped. The figure in the mirror began to move, stepping closer to the reflection of me. Its shadow seemed to stretch, spilling out of the mirror like smoke, curling along the edges of the glass. I stumbled back, tripping over the corner of my rug and landing hard on the floor. The shadow stopped. It hovered at the edge of the mirror, as if testing the boundaries of the glass. For a moment, I thought it couldn't cross over. Then it shifted its focus to me. The shadow pressed against the surface of the mirror, and I swore I saw the glass ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. A crack split down the center of the mirror with a sharp, splintering sound. The reflection of me reached out, its hand pressing against the inside of the glass. Please! It whispered one last time, its voice barely audible beneath the hum of the shadow. Don't let it out. With a deafening shatter, the mirror exploded. Shards of glass sprayed across the room, catching the dim light of my phone in flashes of cold silver. I threw my arms over my face, feeling tiny cuts sting my skin. The air filled with an icy wind, carrying with it a low, guttural roar. When the noise subsided, I lowered my arms and saw it, no longer confined to the mirror. The shadowy figure stood in the center of my room, its presence suffocating, like it was drawing all the light and warmth into itself. It towered over me, its outlines shifting and twisting like smoke caught in a storm. My phone's light flickered, struggling against the oppressive darkness that seemed to crawl across the walls. For a brief, terrible moment, I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, as if the weight of the shadow was bearing down on me. The buzzing was louder now, drilling into my thoughts, breaking them apart into fragmented pieces. And then, the voice came again, inside my head, cold and ancient. You let me in. The words echoed, each syllable resonating with a terrible finality. I scrambled backward on the floor, my hands slipping on shattered glass. The shadow moved closer, and as it did, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came in shallow, visible puffs. I tried to scream, to do anything, but the words caught in my throat. All I could do was watch as the shadow loomed over me, its form shifting, growing, becoming something more solid, more human. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, too long, too thin, and its face, oh God, its face, was a featureless void, darker than anything I'd ever seen. But as I stared into that emptiness, something looked back. 2 pinpricks of crimson light flared where its eyes should have been, glowing faintly like embers. The buzzing stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, chilling whisper. Run! My paralysis broke. I lunged for the door, slipping and stumbling as I clutched the handle. Behind me, the shadow surged forward, its form dissolving and reforming like liquid smoke. I flung the door open and bolted into the hallway, my bare feet pounding against the cold wooden floor. The buzzing resumed, louder than ever, chasing me down the corridor. I didn't dare look back. I could feel it behind me, a cold, searing presence that threatened to swallow me whole. I reached the stairs and took them 2 at a time, nearly losing my balance as I stumbled onto the first floor. The lights in the house flickered wildly, casting everything in a strobe-like nightmare. Shadows stretched along the walls, merging into grotesque shapes that writhed and reached for me. The front door was ahead, my salvation. I sprinted toward it, my hand outstretched, but as I reached for the lock, the buzzing stopped. Silence. I froze, hand trembling on the doorknob. Something was wrong. I could feel it, an absence, a void. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me, I turned around. The shadow was gone. The house was still, the only sound my ragged breathing. For a moment, I thought it was over. I almost believed it. Then I heard the whisper, right behind me. "You can't escape what's already inside." The whisper chilled me to my core. I spun around, my back pressing against the door, eyes darting wildly across the room. There was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. But the weight of its presence was suffocating, oppressive. My hand fumbled for the lock on the door, trembling so violently I could barely grasp it. It was stuck. No matter how hard I turned, pulled, or pushed, the deadbolt wouldn't budge. The door might as well have been a wall. A low hum began to build again, somewhere deep inside the house. It wasn't the buzzing from before, this was deeper, resonating through the walls and floorboards. It grew louder with each passing second, the sound reverberating in my chest like a second heartbeat. And then, the lights in the hallway flickered off. I was plunged into darkness. My breathing came fast and shallow as I searched for my phone, only to remember it was upstairs, somewhere in the shattered glass. I pressed myself harder against the door, straining my ears, but the hum drowned out everything else. Except for the footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the top of the stairs. Each step was deliberate, creaking under a weight that seemed far too heavy for anything human. I clamped a hand over my mouth, desperate to stifle the sound of my breathing. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest I was certain it would give me away. The steps stopped halfway down. The silence was worse than the sound. I felt the air shift, colder, heavier. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the doorknob again, my knuckles white from the effort. I pulled, harder than before, and finally, the deadbolt gave way with a loud, metallic clunk. The sound echoed in the silence, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps resumed. They were faster now, almost frantic, descending the stairs with unnatural speed. I yanked the door open, stumbled outside into the freezing night air, and slammed it shut behind me. For a moment I stood there, panting, my back against the door as I stared into the empty street. The world outside was eerily quiet, the faint orange glow of the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. I glanced back at the house, half expecting to see the shadow standing in the window. But it wasn't there. The house was dark and still, its silhouette rising against the night sky like a slumbering beast. I took a hesitant step away, then another, until I was halfway down the driveway. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was over. Then I felt it. The cold, unnatural presence. It wasn't in the house anymore. It was behind me. The breath on the back of my neck was ice cold, and every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't. My legs locked in place, as if the weight of that presence had rooted me to the spot. Slowly, agonizingly, I turned my head. It stood there, inches away. The shadow had taken on a form now, vaguely human, but twisted in ways that defied sense. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Those crimson pinpricks of light burned where its eyes should have been, cutting through the darkness like twin embers. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to suffocate the air around me. The buzzing returned, louder than ever, filling my skull like an angry swarm. The thing tilted its head further, and I swear I saw its shadowy outline ripple with silent laughter. Then, in a voice that sounded like splintering wood, it spoke. "You're mine!" I stumbled back, my legs finally obeying me, but the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. The driveway stretched and twisted, the streetlights flickering wildly. The shadow didn't follow. It didn't need to. It was everywhere, its darkness pooling around me, swallowing the world whole. I turned and ran, my bare feet slapping against the freezing pavement, but the road seemed endless. The houses lining the street blurred into smudges of gray, their windows dark and lifeless. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was right there, just behind me, its presence wrapping around my throat like a noose. And then, the world shifted. One moment I was running, the next I was standing in my bedroom, My legs buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The buzzing was gone, replaced by a deafening silence. I looked around, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The room was just as I'd left it, shattered glass glittering on the floor, the broken mirror leaning crookedly against the wall. But something was different. The air felt wrong, thicker, like I was breathing in smoke. And then I saw it. The shadow was gone. But my reflection, what was left of it in the cracked shards of the mirror, was still there. Only it wasn't me. The reflection stood in a way I wasn't, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its lips pulled into a grin far too wide for my face. Its eyes, my eyes, were black pits, empty and endless. It raised a hand, fingers splayed, and waved at me, though I hadn't moved. Then it spoke, its voice a perfect mimicry of mine, dripping with malice. "Did you really think you could leave?" The room plunged into darkness, and I was no longer sure if I was the one trapped in the reflection, or if I'd ever left at all. The suffocating darkness pressed against me, stealing every ounce of air from my lungs. I scrambled blindly, my hands clawing at the ground, trying to find something, anything, to anchor me to reality. But the more I moved, the more disoriented I became. The floor felt wrong beneath my fingers, smooth and cold like glass, but shifting as if alive. "Don't fight it!" My voice echoed from the void, warped and mocking. "It's already over." I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My throat felt swollen, choked by an invisible force. Instead, I focused on crawling forward, my hands finding purchase on the unfamiliar surface. A flicker of light broke through the darkness, a faint glow, distant and weak. Desperate, I moved toward it. The light grew brighter with each painstaking inch, but so did the dread pooling in my stomach. It wasn't a warm light. It was cold, sterile, and unwelcoming, like the flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't coming from a room or a doorway. It was coming from beneath me. I froze. The smooth surface beneath me turned reflective, and as I looked down, the light illuminated what I now lay atop, a perfect, unbroken mirror. My breath caught in my chest as I saw myself reflected in it, staring back up at me. Only it wasn't me. The thing in the mirror grinned, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. Its teeth were jagged, uneven, and stained with something dark and viscous. It tilted its head, mimicking my earlier movement, and reached up toward the glass, toward me. The surface rippled like water as its hand pressed against it. I scrambled backward, the reflective floor shuddering beneath me, but the thing kept coming. Its hand breached the surface, stretching out, its fingers impossibly long and blackened, tipped with claws. It grabbed at my ankle, and the coldness of its touch burned. "No!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. I kicked frantically, my heel connecting with something solid. The thing recoiled, its hand snapping back into the mirror, but its grin never wavered. The light flickered, and the room shifted again. I was no longer on the ground but standing in the hallway outside my bedroom. The door was ajar, and faint, rhythmic tapping echoed from within. I didn't want to look. Every part of me screamed to turn and run, but my legs carried me forward, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. I pushed the door open. The mirror was whole again, standing upright on my dresser, as though it had never been broken. But it was wrong. Its surface was black, glossy, and pulsing like a heartbeat. The tapping came from within, and as I stepped closer, I saw them, fingertips pressed against the glass, pushing outward. "Let me out," my reflection whispered. Its face emerged, distorted and hollow-eyed, pressing against the blackened surface. "Let me take your place." The buzzing returned, louder than ever, drowning out my thoughts. The walls around me began to ripple, their colors bleeding into one another like wet paint. The world was unraveling. And then I understood. It wasn't the shadow trying to get out. It was me. I was the one trapped now. "No!" I screamed, lunging at the mirror. My reflection reached back, its grin widening as our hands collided on opposite sides of the glass. The surface was freezing, sapping every ounce of strength from my body. I pounded on the mirror, but it held firm, my reflection watching with cruel delight. "I warned you," it said, its voice overlapping with the shadow's guttural hum. "You let me in. Now I'm free." The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was my reflection stepping through the glass, stretching its stolen limbs, its grin never fading. The darkness was suffocating, pressing against me from all sides like the weight of the ocean. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, but I was still aware. A cold numbness seeped into my skin, spreading to my chest, then my limbs. I wasn't sure if I was lying down, standing, or floating in a void that stretched forever. And then I heard it. The faintest sound, like a whisper carried on a breeze. It wasn't words, not exactly, but an echo of a thought, a memory, a scream swallowed by time. My ears strained to catch it, and as I focused, the sound grew clearer. It was laughter. My laughter. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the abyss. The sound was warped, hollow, mocking, a twisted parody of joy. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside me, reverberating through my bones, through my soul. "No, no, no," I muttered, but my voice sounded weak, distant, as if it didn't belong to me anymore. The laughter grew louder, sharper, until it was all I could hear. And then, with a sudden snap, the darkness shattered. I was standing in my bedroom again. The mirror was gone, the shards no longer littered the floor. Everything was pristine, untouched. My bed was neatly made, the dresser aligned perfectly against the wall. Even my phone sat on the nightstand, glowing faintly. It was as if none of it had ever happened. I should have felt relief, but the air in the room was heavy, wrong. I turned toward the doorway, half expecting the shadow to be waiting there, but the hallway was empty. Quiet. Too quiet. I glanced at the mirror, or where the mirror had been, but instead of the void, there was only the faint outline of my reflection in the polished surface of the dresser. I stepped closer, hesitant, and stared into it. My reflection smiled. Not a small, reassuring smile. No. It was wide, predatory, the edges of its mouth curling up far too high. Its eyes glinted with something sharp, malicious, alien. I stumbled back, my chest tightening as I realized the truth. I wasn't in control anymore. The reflection raised a hand, casually brushing non-existent dust off its shoulder. I hadn't moved. My real body was still frozen in place, but it was moving freely in the glass, mocking me. "You look so surprised," it said, and its voice, my voice, sent chills down my spine. "You should have seen this coming." I tried to scream, to run, but my body refused to respond. I was a passenger now, trapped in a shell I no longer commanded. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its hands against the glass, its twisted grin stretching impossibly wide. "It's so much better out here," it purred. "You can stay where you belong." With that, it stepped back, its movements fluid, confident, as it turned to face the empty room behind it. My body followed, but not by my will. I was watching through my own eyes, powerless, as it reached for the door. The world outside the room was wrong. The hallway stretched endlessly, its walls lined with infinite doors, each slightly ajar. From within came faint whispers, indistinct voices calling out, laughing, crying. My reflection walked down the corridor, each step resonating like a drumbeat in my ears. It stopped at a door, its handle worn and splintered. My heart sank as I recognized it. It was the front door of my childhood home, a place I hadn't seen in years. The whispers behind the door were louder now, familiar voices echoing with emotion. My reflection turned to me, grinning. "You'll love it here," it said. "So many memories to explore." Then it opened the door, and everything fell away. The void returned, swallowing me whole, but this time I could see the reflection still watching, its grin never fading. It waved once, mockingly, before the door closed between us. And I was alone. The void stretched around me, endless and suffocating, but something was different now. The darkness wasn't still, it churned, rippling with shapes I couldn't quite make out. Shadows moved within shadows, writhing like worms in the soil. And then came the voices. Whispers. Countless whispers, overlapping, bleeding into one another until they became a deafening cacophony. Some begged, others screamed, and still others laughed, a hollow, joyless sound that sent shivers through whatever part of me was still me. "You've joined us," a voice said, clear and sharp, cutting through the chaos like a knife. It wasn't mine, but it was close enough to make my skin crawl. "You didn't think you were the first, did you?" Shapes began to emerge from the void, flickering into being like shadows cast by an invisible light. Faces, hollow and gaunt, their mouths twisted in endless screams, their eyes vacant. They surrounded me, their forms melding into one another, overlapping like the voices. "Let me out," one of them whispered, its voice dripping with despair. "It took everything from me. My family, my name. You're nothing now." Another hissed, its form slithering closer, its body stretching and twisting like smoke. "Just like us." I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The shadows pressed in, circling me, their whispers growing louder, more frenzied. My pulse hammered in my chest, a desperate rhythm against the suffocating void. And then, from within the crowd of shifting faces and shapes, I saw it. Me. Or at least, what was left of me. My reflection stood there, impossibly still amid the writhing chaos. Its face was serene, its grin calm and patient, but its eyes, those hollow, dark pits, burned with something cruel. "You thought you could fight it?" it said, stepping closer. Its voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of the void itself. "You can't fight what you've always been. What are you?" I forced the words out, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" It tilted its head, considering me. "What am I?" "I'm you. The part of you you've always tried to bury. The fear, the anger, the doubt. I've been with you since the beginning. You just never let me take the wheel." I shook my head, backing away. "You're lying. You're not me. You're—" The thing laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Does it matter? This is your home now. The void. The place where all the forgotten pieces of yourself come to die." "No," I said, the word weak but defiant. "No, I won't stay here. I'll find a way out." It laughed again, louder this time, the sound echoing around me. The other shadows joined in, their hollow laughter filling the void. "There is no way out," it said, stepping closer, until its face was inches from mine. "But if you want to try, go ahead." And then it grabbed me. Its hand plunged into my chest, cold and searing, and I felt a pain so intense I thought I would shatter. It was pulling something from me, dragging it out inch by inch. My vision blurred, and the void around me spun wildly, the shadows twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. I was back in my room, gasping for air, the floor solid beneath me. The mirror was gone, the dresser empty, but I could still feel it, the void. It was inside me now, a weight pressing on my chest, a shadow lurking in my thoughts. The room felt too quiet, too still. I turned, catching my reflection in the window. It was me, but for the briefest moment, its mouth twitched, just slightly, as if it wanted to smile. And then the window shattered. A hand shot through the glass, blackened and clawed, grabbing my wrist with a grip like iron. It pulled, and I stumbled forward, the edge of the void opening once more before me. I screamed, clawing at the floor, but the hand dragged me closer, inch by inch, back into the abyss. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was my own reflection in the shards of broken glass. It wasn't struggling. It was waving goodbye.